So hang on, are you saying that moons, or is it just Demos that is the case? Their position relative to their planet beneath is such that it's always the same two bits that are closest, so you can build a cable between them.
Um,
Is that right?
it's that they're low enough mass that they're low enough mass that we could conceivably move them without building rockets that are comically large, but high enough mass that they could serve as useful anchors. They're not in the perfect orbit, but they're low enough mass that we could maneuver them if we can generate fuel on them.
So so the principle of a space elevator is basically a big cable that goes from your planet up to a mass up there, and it's basically like oh, what's it like? Those Scottish guys who swing around with a rope and a weight on the ends, and
It's not a
eventually they
it's
let
not a
go. But
caber, is it?
well, so how would you do it? Because I don't believe we have the. Well, I'll explain it more simply because I don't believe we have the material science to do anything like this at the moment. But but essentially, it's a cable between a point on the planet and a point on an orbiting object, and that orbiting object has to be in the right orbit that it basically stays in the same relative position to the planet. Have I got that right?
More or less, yes.
Okay.
What's interesting you say the material science though, because the material science requirements are dependent on the body. Um,
Yes.
so for some bodies they're simply not it's not practicable. Venus rotates so slowly that you would need to place that cable comically far out. And it would need to be comically strong, and the atmosphere is difficult. The Earth
Yes.
is right on the edge of what we think is practicable, but the Moon especially is actually the material science requirements are low enough that we could build it now. You could build it out of Kevlar and it would work. In fact, the
Okay.
massive Kevlar you would require could be taken in 2 launches of Starship. It,
Okay.
it's because remember the lower gravity and the fact that it's rotating at a reasonably good clip means that your space elevator doesn't need to be very far out. And because of the low gravity, the mass of that cable isn't going to cause it to rip itself apart. On Earth, the problem isn't necessarily that the tension it creates, it's that the mass of the cable as you get higher and higher gets heavier and heavier, and then you need to build it stronger and stronger to. But on the moon, we have the advantage that Kevlar, a material we can already make in pretty large
Yeah.
quantities, is strong enough to do it. Um,
So what's the huge? Take us through the huge advantages of space elevators then.
they let you skip more and more of the delta V. Um, so uh, we spoke about the amount of delta V needed to get from low Earth orbit to the moon, which is about 4,000 meters per second. So about a little less than half what you need to get from Earth there. But of that, around 4,000 kilometers, 1,700 are getting from the moon to low lunar orbit. If you can skip that, you've essentially cut the amount of delta V you need in half. Now you just need to get from low lunar orbit to low Earth orbit. And so the huge advantage there is that any system you have that lets you get rid of delta V is incredibly valuable because you're effectively shortening the distance.
And it's about half of it that you take away, is it?
Very near. It's a
So
little less than half.
effectively, whatever amount of payloads that you're currently transporting, if you can get your space elevator operating, you can instantly double.
Yes.
So it's a huge efficiency gain. Okay, so I can see it working on the moon, and then you essentially just build stuff, and you use some form of
You
elevator
use
to go up and
a
down.
solar powered crawler.
How does that work?
You essentially just have a vehicle with large solar panels and wheels that grip the Kevlar or tether, and using electrical energy slowly climb it up, maybe over a month or so. But if it's just cargo, who cares if it takes a month?
Is there any viability of one of these being built on Earth?
That's the trouble, which is that on Earth, the higher gravity and the thickness of the atmosphere means that you have to place it higher and build it stronger. We have a few candidate materials that we could use. You've probably heard graphene
Yes.
is about the only candidate we have so far because it needs to be both incredibly strong in tension and it needs to be incredibly light.
So
Um,
so this would be forming graphene into what, carbon nanotubes, something like
yes,
that?
exactly. Which, by the way,
Okay, so
Venus is incredibly well positioned to manufacture, given its atmosphere is made out of carbon dioxide.
yes. Yeah, so actually, if we got graphene cracked, we solved that problem. Then that just makes Venus even more viable as not only a gas station, but as a. Because if we got graphene cracked, you'd probably build almost everything out of it.
Exactly. And to say nothing of the fact that if you can harvest silicon from the surface of Venus, you can make essentially every polymer that we use in plastics, including acid-resistant polymers. The chemistry is actually pretty simple once you've done it. And so
Yes.
Venus is incredibly well positioned to not necessarily replace Earth, but supplement it in the production of those things which are complex enough, which are both complex and low mass, which you would still you'd rather make them in space, but which you can launch from Earth for a while. But
Yes.
Venus has clouds of sulfuric acid, so you can get it off of Venus for lower because of its lower mass, and if you're firing from the cloud city, your delta V is lower. It's nearer the center of the solar system, so it's closer to everywhere,
Yeah.
and it's got a huge amount of in situ resources in the atmosphere and potentially on the surface.
It sounds like it's going to replace Germany because Germany is close to everywhere. It has a huge, what used to have a huge steel industry, chemicals industry, vehicles industry. All sorts of vehicles. Now, obviously, it's being deindustrialized, but effectively, what you're saying is that Venus is the Germany of the future,
I think you could put it that way, yes.
which then enables you to process the materials, like I say, on the asteroid belt. So that replaces Ukraine and Russia and China. Um, you can, yeah, the whole new dynamic is opening up. So, and that's why you call Mars a trap, because superficially it looks more attractive, but there's not an awful lot going on. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes.
Because if you go mining for heavy metals, well, why not just do that in the bloody asteroid belt?
Well, it's Mars not only is a trap for a lot of reasons. First of all, it looks like it should be the simplest to colonize. You know, it's a
Yeah,
terrestrial planet, doesn't have a thick atmosphere, and in principle, it should be. It's screamingly radioactive. The dust has never been softened by a hydrosphere, so every dust particle is incredibly sharp. So enjoy having subatomic scratches on everything, every piece of glass, every polymer. Um, that
yeah,
you
yeah. So I think what you're getting at there is if you zoom in on a microscope on a particle of sand on Earth,
yes,
it's kind of perfectly smooth because it's been ground down by water and air for
exactly,
so long. But on Mars, if you zoom in on a microscope, it looks like a piece of barbed wire or something. I mean, it's or
exactly.
razor wire. I mean, it's just very, very jagged,
It's a
and the effect of that running over your solar panels and your bases and your spacesuit is, I mean, everything just gets slowly cut to shreds.
yes. It abrades everything. So you need to be,
Yes.
so Mars will need to regularly receive new spacesuits, new hard suits, new solar panels. Anything it can't make needs to be constantly renewed. And unlike almost all of these other bodies, Mars, Mars doesn't offer. So Venus has the advantage of it has essentially the same gravity as Earth, which is something we can't fix. Venus a has pretty good protection from radiation, and the atmosphere isn't radioactive because of the sheer thickness of it. Meanwhile, Mars' surface is screamingly radioactive. Now, one advantage Mars does have is the Martian regolith is quite iron rich. Processing iron and making iron on Mars
Okay.
should be, in principle useful, but I kind of compare Mars to Antarctica in that, yes, you could settle populations there with enough time and effort, but they're just everything you would want to get on Mars probably can be gotten easier elsewhere. You know that you
Well,
look at Mars is incredibly energy poor. It doesn't have a concentration of
mm,
heavy metals, so nuclear reactors aren't viable. It's further out, so the solar irradiance is very weak. Um, so if you wanted to colonize Mars, you would need some way of bringing a lot of energy, for example, magnetic deceleration.
okay. Let me circle back to that. Let me just finish my thinking through on Mars.
Sure.
So, um, incidentally, I think you can add gravity, can't you? You can just. I mean, it's very tricky to do, but you add a sort of big bowl and then you rotate it, and therefore you get a little bit of extra centrifugal force added to the Mars gravity. So you can add a bit of gravity, but that is bloody complicated. Um, so Venus, because you've got your chemicals, your petroleum products, effectively, a whole bunch of other useful chemicals and carbon dioxide. Okay, got that. Mars, you've got iron and radiation and dust that will kill you. Not much. There is some water, but not an awful lot. So, what is the Stillman case for Mars? Because I mean, Elon Musk is quite a smart guy, and he's absolutely fixated on it.
I think the Steelman case is that unlike all of the other destinations, Mars is the only one that, without large advances of technology, we could start putting populations on in large numbers. Venus,
Ah,
because
okay.
it's not. There's a difference between the technology and the engineering. The technology to
Yes.
work on Mars is more or less finished, and the engineering is pretty close to done. On Venus, the out and out challenge isn't super enormous, but we haven't really thought of building levitating structures before, um,
Yes.
in large quantities.
So we know the principles of the
Yeah.
physics, but the engineering just hasn't been worked on.
And exactly. And so if your goal is not economic, but it's ideological, you think the important thing is our
Right.
species needs to be protected against natural disaster. And for that, you need a large enough population to have a stable gene pool. You
I
need
see.
and you need to get to the lowest level of self-sustainment possible. Mars is it's at a medium of acceptability. One good idea of looking at terraforming and habitability is to consider how much protection you need in a given environment. So on one end of that spectrum, you need a full spacesuit and you can't go outside because the radiation will kill you. On the other end, you just need the protections on Earth, shelter, water, all that. Um, Venus,
And Venus 50 miles up or 50 kilometers up gives you
you, you don't
that.
you don't need a hard suit because the pressure is fine. So a
Yep.
soft suit is fine. Those are way cheaper than a hard suit. You can do way more in
Yep.
them. The temperature is also, it's with even moderate cooling, you're all right. The only thing that's really troublesome is the atmosphere. So it's conceivable
Mm.
that on the outer, if you have a floating city and there's an outer rig, all you would need is a breathing tube and something to protect your eyes.
Yep. And a Hawaiian shirt, and
Yeah,
you're good.
well, probably some kind of skin tight soft suit to keep the chemicals off of you because the sulfuric acid
Yes.
clouds will be troublesome. But
Yes.
in principle, Venus you can put people on with a much lower level of protection once you've gotten there. But there's a very high threshold where once you have the technology to settle Venus, it's more attractive. But the engineering challenges there are still pretty substantial. I mean, we've only built one object that has ever actually floated on Venus. Well, the Soviets built a couple of them. There were balloon probes that floated through the Venusian atmosphere. Um, but trying to create and then transport them and then affix large structures to them is difficult. On Mars, even though it's an enormous challenge, it's a traditional challenge. It's okay, we put people
Mm.
there, a lot of them die, we learn to manufacture structures there, a lot more people die. It's sort of like Jamestown, where it's not in the ideal place, but it's familiar enough to England that it's not like Cuba.
Yes.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.